Hey, it's Let's Write Tonight. I'm working on Deepriver in the Shadows of Lordaeron, and I found a video here talking about redemption arcs. So I thought I'd watch that because that's basically what Saljourn's story is when it's all said and done is redemption as a Death Knight.
Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. A redemption arc is one of the most familiar and satisfying story arcs in storytelling. Redemptive arcs seamlessly fit onto traditional storytelling structures. Watching someone atone, change, and ultimately earn forgiveness is an emotional payoff that resonates deeply with the audience. But what happens when that payoff never comes? When redemption is denied, subverted, or outright fails. Anti-redemption arcs, when a character attempts to redeem themselves but fails, or is never given the opportunity, are far rarer, yet just as powerful, narratively speaking, as traditional redemption arcs. And by exploring these failed or subverted redemption arcs, we can gain a deeper understanding of why redemption arcs are so popular, what makes redemption so appealing, why it is effective, and the cost of denying it.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
An anti-redemption arc isn't just the absence of redemption. It's when a character attempts redemption but fails, is denied, or sometimes outright rejects the opportunity to change. But anti-redemption arcs fall outside of the two traditional types of redemption arcs. We have heroic redemption arcs and tragic redemption arcs.
Father.
No. We do it together. Son.
The heroic redemption arc is what I tend to think as being the most popular and the most common type of redemption arc we usually see. In these cases, a character acknowledges their past sins or their past bad history and actively atones, or at least changes or attempts to change their ways, but is then ultimately forgiven. This arc usually gives the audience a feeling of catharsis. The idea that people can change, make amends, and find some sort of peace. It is an inherent part of the history of storytelling. We can look at an example like Prince Zuko in Avatar. Zuko's arc is a rare example of redemption happening in stages. His first attempt at redemption, returning home, fails because he relies on external validation. His true redemption really comes when he acknowledges his wrongs and actively fights against his past actions. One of the most powerful moments in Zuko's redemption is his confrontation with Uncle Iroh. Instead of being met with anger, he is immediately forgiven. This highlights a key truth about redemption. It requires both self-acceptance and external forgiveness. But one really interesting redemption arc, or at least heroic redemption arc, is Ender Wiggin in Ender's Game. But more specifically, in Ender's Game and in Speaker of the Dead. Ender Wiggin's redemption arc is one of the most recognized in science fiction because it is one that spans decades as he seeks atonement for an atrocity he never meant to commit. In Ender's Game, Ender is manipulated into leading humanity's war against the Formics, unknowingly committing genocide when he destroyed their homeworld. The revelation devastates him. Humanity hails him as a hero, but he sees himself as a murderer. Unlike typical redemption arcs, where characters must seek forgiveness for intentional wrongdoing, Ender's redemption is about taking responsibility for a crime committed through this manipulation. Rather than embracing his status as a savior, Ender chooses exile. He dedicates his life to understanding the beings he destroyed, becoming the speaker for the dead, a role which he tells the truth about the deceased without judgment. His ultimate act of atonement comes when he discovers a dormant Formic queen egg. Instead of seeking absolution, he makes his mission to find a new home for the species he destroyed. This moment transforms his redemption from one of guilt to one of restoration. He does not seek to undo the past, but to make amends through his actions. In Speaker for the Dead, Ender continues his journey by applying these lessons to a new alien race, ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. His redemption is unique because it is not achieved through self-sacrifice, but through a lifelong pursuit of penance, understanding, and advocacy. Unlike tragic redemption arcs where characters atone with their deaths, Ender's price is a lifetime of guilt, exile, and the quiet burden of making things right. His story sort of challenges the idea that redemption must be dramatic. Sometimes, though, it is found in choosing to do better, even when forgiveness is impossible. But unlike Ender's heroic redemption, there's Kratos in God of War Ragnarok. Ender's heroic redemption arc is typical for heroic redemptions, where Kratos' arc isn't necessarily about undoing the wrongs of the past, but about choosing a different path moving forward. He was once a figure of great destruction, but now he embraces restraint, fatherhood, and wisdom. The contrast between Kratos and Thor in Ragnarok is key. Both are powerful warriors, burdened by their past. But while Kratos chooses redemption, Thor remains trapped in this cycle of violence.
The cycle ends here. Must be better than this.
Kratos is a brutal warrior who is finally seeking a new path, one that strays from bloodshed and is instead wrapped around fatherhood.
I've partnered with Skillshare in the past and have spoken a lot about the different subjects and classes I've taken. From painting and artwork to productivity and creative design, Skillshare has been a huge asset in my professional and creative pursuits. Recently, I've been taking MKBHD's YouTube success classes, which focus on video scripting, shooting, and editing. Most of you know this, but I did not go to school for filmmaking, nor have I ever really studied the video creation process, traditionally speaking. Platforms like Skillshare are great
drinking
for
a
those who
Pepsi?
want to professionalize
he
or even
drinking?
level up on a specific skill or craft. It's an amazing platform for beginners and experienced practitioners alike. Skillshare is the largest online community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. It's a platform built by creatives for creatives. Whatever your interest is, Skillshare likely has a class on it. There are a ton of topics you can join, from graphic art and painting to productivity and creative writing. I've been wanting to improve as a creative in the visual space, and MKBHD's classes have been perfect, especially as it relates to creating video content on YouTube. If you want to help my channel out and improve on a creative skill you've been working on, consider coming over and practicing your creativity on Skillshare. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video.
Please don't go. It's great having you here.
On the other hand, though, we have the tragic redemption arcs. These arcs are typically bittersweet in some way. Characters attempt to redeem themselves, but at a great cost, and sometimes even their own life. We see a lot of sacrifice or self-sacrifice at the expense of redemption. These stories often explore whether redemption is worth it or if the price is too high, and to what extent we can even seek redemption, if it is possible. But one of my favorite examples of redemption is with Harrier Dubois in Disco Elysium. Harry is one of the best examinations of a tragic redemption arc. His story and background are directly tied to this tragedy of redemption and the ability to move on and heal. His redemption isn't just about solving a murder, it's about reclaiming his own identity. The player, as Harry, must actively work to repair his relationships, accept responsibility for his past, and reject these self-destructive tendencies. An interesting and tragic aspect of his arc is that it's player-driven. If you refuse redemption, continuing down the path of, say, a superstar cop, a hobo cop, or the apocalypse cop, Harry will still solve the murder, but will remain self-destructive and in some ways unredeemed. And even if you do push Harry down this path of redemption, Harry struggles with addiction and is crippled by amnesia. Either this amnesia was induced by his own depression, a broken heart, or the ungodly amount of drugs he took, making his redemption arc feel almost impossible at first. Yet even small victories, like staying sober for a day, and the other half of the cop types, like the sorry cop, the boring cop, or the honorable cop. And even more so when we look at the changing perception of the other characters, like Kim, Titus, and even Kuno. They become and feel like these major milestones. This reflects real life in some ways. Redemption is a slow process. It's a difficult process, rather than just being this single heroic act that undoes all of the wrongs that were once committed. Now, depending on how you view this game and its story, Harry's arc can either be seen as this heroic redemption arc or a very tragic one. I tend to think that this falls more in line with the tragic redemption arc because Harry still carries a lot of the baggage and is still plagued by addiction and mental illness, despite having solved the murder and changed or at least redeemed some aspects of his life. In many regards, the game tells you that even if you made these changes, the damage is done. Harry is still heartbroken. He's still an alcoholic. He's still depressed. And you've left a wake of destruction. But even looking at Harry's arc as a whole, and perhaps the small impact that you've had on his life in the short amount of days, the perception might be that this redemption has had an effect that is as wide as a puddle, but goes as deep as the ocean. However, we can also look at Star Wars, where character arcs and archetypes are very common. Darth Vader is probably one of the best and most popular looks at the tragic redemption arc. Vader's redemption is one of the most famous examples of redemption through sacrifice. But what makes it unique is that it only happens because of Luke's unwavering belief in him. His arc suggests that redemption isn't just about personal change. It often requires someone else to believe that that change is possible. His final act, killing the Emperor, proves his redemption, but he dies before he can fully live in that redemption. This is a classic example of the tragic redemption formula. Redemption is earned, but at the cost of the character's life.
So
Walter
that's
White
exactly
is another example of a tragic redemption arc.
That's
What
exactly
might be seen
Sal.
as the
Tragic
redemptive
redemption.
moment is one that is sometimes up for debate. His final act, saving Jesse, looks redemptive, but I think that it doesn't really atone for everything that he's done. In his final conversation with Skylar, though, Walter finally admits that his empire wasn't about protecting his family. It was about his own ego instead. This moment of honesty is arguably his real redemption. Not necessarily saving Jesse, but owning up to the lies for the first time. And this doesn't really change how other characters see, or they don't even really forgive Walter, even though he's owned up to this deep flaw. And that is really the tragic part about his sort of redemptive arc in the final season. But probably one of the most tragic and redemptive moments is one that comes from both the book and the movie in the Lord of the Ring franchise. Boromir. Initially, Boromir is noble but flawed. His desperation to save Gondor leaves him to succumb to the ring's temptation. He attempts to take the ring from Frodo in the process. This moment of weakness nearly shatters the Fellowship and highlights the weakness of men and the temptation of this great power. When the Uruk-hai attack, and in the books it was goblins, I believe, Boromir fiercely defends Merry and Pippin. He fights alone, refusing to fall even after being struck by multiple arrows. His stand is not just an act of valor, it is atonement. He does not seek forgiveness with words, but through his actions, his blood.
His final moments with Aragon cement his redemption. His dying words, "I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king," are a heartbreaking acknowledgement of both his failure and his unwavering loyalty. It is a moment of clarity, but also of tragedy. He realizes too late that Aragon is the true leader Gondor needs, and that his own desire for power blinded him. He dies with honor, yet with the sorrow of knowing he will never see his home saved. In Tolkien's books, Boromir's sacrifice resonates even further. Frodo, despite having fought with Boromir on who should carry the ring, and that it is his own responsibility, still mourned him. And when Faramir asked Frodo point blank, "Then you would grieve to learn that he is dead?" And Frodo responded, "I would grieve indeed." It adds another redemptive layer. Even in death, Boromir is forgiven by the person who he probably hurt the most. Both of these, heroic and tragic, work because they are emotionally satisfying. They show growth, consequence, and closure. They tend to neatly tie the narrative up, making what we have just watched, read, or played feel like it mattered. Feel like that struggle was worth it. The characters and the plot that we had invested our time and our emotional energy into has some sort of payoff.
I pray, but I'm lost. Or am I just praying to nothing?
But that's what makes the anti-redemption arcs so interesting. They almost act like this path to nowhere, adding commentary on how we view redemption, and even take tragic redemption arcs a step further, stating that some people, some acts just can't be redeemed or are incapable of being redeemed. An anti-redemption arc is when a character fails to be redeemed, is denied redemption, or refuses to change despite being given the opportunity. These arcs challenge our expectations, subverting what we want from redemption by showing us its absence. We can look at the Lord of the Rings again. Gollum is a unique case because he could have been redeemed. Unlike Boromir, he has multiple chances to change, but he chooses selfishness every time. Whether that is a reflection of the corrupting power of the ring, or it is a look at rejecting redemption. That is more for the audience to interpret and decide. However, Frodo, like Luke with Vader, believes Gollum's potential for redemption. But unlike Vader, Gollum actively rejects it.
Well, I saved us. It wasn't me.
His final act is a literal downfall, proving that some characters are beyond saving. Gollum is a character who could have been saved, but his greed and obsession prevented him from ever truly changing. And again, revisiting Star Wars, but this time going into the Knights of the Old Republic, we have Darth Malak. Malak's regret at the end of the Knights of the Old Republic is compelling because it's too little too late. Depending on the path the player chooses, they can show mercy or reject him outright, reinforcing the theme that redemption must be earned, not just requested. And if the player chooses the dark side option, Malak's death becomes just another power move, completely erasing any hope of redemption. The end of the Knights of the Republic shows regret from the main villain at the end, but depending on the player's choice, he can be met with cruelty, indifference, or a redemptive hand. There's also Rin in the Poppy War trilogy. Rin's arc is especially tragic because she believes she's on the right path. Unlike Zuko, who ultimately listens to the others around him, Rin doubles down on her mistakes. Her ending is haunting because it shows the weight of all of her choices. Unlike traditional redemptive sacrifices, Boromir or Vader, Rin's death is not a moment of peace. It's the culmination of her refusal to change. The story follows her, a character who spirals deeper into war and destruction, rejecting any possibility of a peaceful redemption. And then there's also Griffith in Berserk. This is one of my favorite, or maybe least favorite, examples
Never
of an
watched
anti-redemption
Berserk.
arc.
but
Griffith begins as a seemingly noble
I'm tracking
character,
that the artist is
making
worthy
his eventual
of
betrayal
watching.
all the more devastating. His arc is a perfect example of redemption denied, but not because he was ever offered it, but because he completely abandons any interest in it. The eclipse scene is what cements Griffith as an anti-redemption character. His betrayal is so complete that any sympathy for him is shattered, making him one of the most chilling examples of a failed redemption. This is perhaps one of the best looks at an anti-redemption arc. Any sympathy we once had for him is crushed by his ultimate betrayal and descent into monstrosity. And sometimes these anti-redemption arcs can be a way to reveal the true villain or antagonist's backstory, being the sort of villain origin story of what shaped them to who they are. But these anti-redemption arcs work because they deny the emotional satisfaction of redemption. They leave the audience unsettled and sometimes feeling betrayed. They remind us that not everybody is capable of redemption or worthy of being redeemed. And this really speaks to the dilemma that occurs between expectations and denial. Humans are wired to recognize and see patterns, especially when it comes to storytelling and seeking narrative closure. We often expect arcs to end in certain ways or pan out in others. So when redemption is teased and then snatched away,
I like how he's got
can
like a
create
yellow
this
light
emotional
with a blue
whiplash.
background and
This
then
is
a
why
blue light
characters
with
like
a yellow
Griffith
background.
and Rin,
I like that
and
look.
even Gollum can feel so haunting. Their failure isn't just a simple plot twist. It's a direct rebuke of our desire to see a positive resolution for those characters.
I've never been with any woman but Cersei. So in my own way, I have more honor than poor old dead Ned.
But why do we crave redemption? And why does it sometimes feel like we've been robbed of redemption in these anti-redemption stories or anti-redemption arcs? The reason failed redemption arcs are so powerful is because we as the audience want redemption to be possible. We want to believe that people and characters can change, that atonement means something, and that even the worst people can possibly get better. We want to see the good in people. It is one of the strange parts of the human condition that there's some redeeming glimmer of humanity. There's an expectation that we have when we approach a story and see a character trying to change. We want to see that redeeming moment, either heroic or tragic. But when it's denied, it can leave us with some sort of unresolved tension and sometimes a deeper sense of injustice than their own actions, which can be incredibly powerful if done correctly. And I emphasize if done correctly because this narrative choice is incredibly risky and can be hard to pull off, which I think is really why we don't see anti-redemption arcs occur more often. I think that can be summed up that it can be incredibly frustrating to invest so much time into a character only to have them remain unredeemed. Because we are familiar with some narrative patterns, an anti-redemption arc could feel like it is coming from nowhere or that it's only there for some kind of edgy shock value. And I do get that argument. I do understand sometimes the dismissal of this sort of character arc. But I think there are some signs and patterns that we can apply to make an anti-redemption arc feel impactful, but also these patterns and even guidelines to go by can help make heroic and tragic redemption arcs more powerful as well. A big rule of writing is that we should really try to foreshadow. And specifically for redemption, if a character's failure to redeem themselves has been built up throughout the story and it feels natural rather than cheap, it can often feel earned. The example here is Griffith in Berserk. But also when the anti-redemption or the redemption, when it aligns with the theme, it can also feel earned as well. If the story is about power, corruption, or fate, an anti-redemption arc can reinforce those ideas. similar to the way in which the themes are reinforced with Rin in the Poppy War trilogy. But I think that one of the other ones, and probably this is one of the trickier ways to do it, is when it challenges the audience's expectations. If the story makes us think a character, but more specifically a secondary character or even the antagonist, is on a redemptive path only to have it ripped away, it can raise the tension for their final scene and even future scenes. The example here being Gollum's final act in Lord of the Rings. But I think in seeing Boromir's death, we also understand the stakes have been raised and the expectations are now broken. One of the main and most popular characters has been killed off. And again, I want to emphasize that anti-redemption arcs are a risk that we can take as writers. And there are some signs that an anti-redemption arc is set to fail. One way that it can be set to fail is if the story builds to redemption, then denies it abruptly or even arbitrarily. If every sign points to redemption, but it's withheld for no real reason or for cheap tension, it feels frustrating and unearned. Another way is if the audience isn't really given any closure. Anti-redemption arcs don't mean unnecessarily ambiguous or a lack of closure. A lack of redemption is fine, but the audience still needs to feel some kind of resolution. Stories and narrative arcs need some kind of finality to them. And finally, if the anti-redemption arc or the concept of redemption being taken away undercuts the themes of the story. If a narrative is about hope and forgiveness and we use an anti-redemption arc, it might feel jarring and extremely out of place.
You really dropped the ball, Harry. 4.6 billion people, and you failed every single one of them.
But this kind of begs the question, what is the cost of redemption? A redemption feeling unearned hits at the heart of redemption in storytelling. All of us are primed or are capable to forgive or even change our opinion of a character, which is a really powerful thing to understand as a writer. But this becomes the difficulty in the anti-redemption arc, because it is why tragic redemptions work so well. The pain we feel when we forgive someone or see that a character has changed but realizes it is too late, or that this is their final act and it's worthless if no one in the story forgives them. It is heartbreaking. It is powerful.
And the big thing to recognize when it comes to the cost of redemption is that it will vary depending on the character, the story, and the themes. But in every case, there is a sacrifice that is made. Sometimes physical, sometimes emotional, and sometimes existential. True redemption is rarely easy. The greater the sin or failure, the greater the price. Sometimes a character pays for that redemption with their life. It seems that the only option in redeeming themselves is by giving up their own life, either as an act of atonement or because their sin is too great to allow them to continue living. Other times, the character must give up their identity and become someone else. Some characters redeem themselves by shedding their past selves, fundamentally changing who they are or abandoning what they once stood for. And there are also cases where a relationship is sacrificed or a loved one is lost. Redemption can come at the cost of losing trust, love, or the people who once mattered most. Characters can't always have both redemption and happiness. One must sometimes be sacrificed for the other. But relationships aren't always the most important thing to a character. Power is another thing that is sometimes given up. For some, redemption means abandoning ambition, status, or even their greatest strength in favor of doing the right thing. If a character's power is tied to their sin, giving it up often is a necessary step towards redemption. And finally, there's also the freedom and living with that guilt for the rest of their life. Not all redemption is paid in blood. Sometimes the price is living with the weight of those actions. Some characters aren't necessarily allowed a clean slate. Instead, the redemption lies in accepting their sins and moving forward despite them.
Redemption, when earned, is one of the most satisfying resolutions in storytelling. But when it is twisted or subverted or outright denied, it reminds us of an even harsher truth, that redemption is not a guarantee, that there is a cost to redemption. And some will seek it and fail. Some will ask for it and be denied. And some will never even try.
Ooh. I thought that was good. What else we got? I think it's time for some music.
What?
Trying to remember which orc guilds formed from that. There were several of them. I'm going to try to finish Act 3's sort of outline here. I'm 80 pages in, but I took a break to actually put together this outline. right back. What the cat wants, the cat gets. Those are the rules. Yeah, Act 3. I'm not really happy with Act 3 yet. I just let the cat out and she's already trying to get back in. Hey, thanks for the follow. I'm just working on my story. Pretty sure almost half my followers on Twitch are fake. It's okay. It is what it do, Yugi. All right, so the shadows depart on their mission on a ship. And they embark together while on their journey. Saljourn starts to relearn his death knights ability and wields them well. Saljourn searches the shadows for companionship, but is met with cold indifference, if not outright hostility. Look at all these goblins. Why are there so many people playing goblins? I think goblins should have been the first neutral race. So while Sal is in the forming, storming, and norming. Sal has to earn their respect, and that's what he's doing throughout Act 3. Okay, so they don't respect him at first. How does he respond? Thinking of a situation for this Tauren to prove himself to his Forsaken allies. But I also need character development, so I can't just treat Saljourn like he's like this wise. I like that Hearthstone. I want to get one of those. All right, so they're on this ship. They're sailing for a while. They don't need food. They're Forsaken. Maybe they hit some rough seas. Maybe they get attacked. What would cause them grief? You are most welcome, the orc said. Not. So what I'm doing in this scene, in this act, I should say, Sal'journ's trying to earn the Forsaken's respect. And so he starts emulating them and acting like them, but it makes him not like himself. And while they approve of his behavior, it's more like kind of like approving a dog shaking your hand. They just don't see him as one of them. And they treat him like a forklift, basically, at first. And as their journey goes, and while sailing, they treat him a little bit more like he's an intelligent creature, not just this brute that they're used to working with. And what he's proving on this mission is that for each thing that they're good at, his compensation for that lack of skill still meets their objectives and intent. And so they learn over the course of this mission that he's an asset and not a burden. And so that's him earning their respect. And towards the end of the act, when they return, he is inducted as a full member of the Shadows, which is the first of the kind because it's Forsaken only. $36,000 words. Granted, a bunch of it's outline. Not a bunch, but some of it. I wonder what Carl Duncan has to say. I want to hear from him again. All right, I'm going to listen to this one since I was kind of interested in arcs tonight, so I want to see what he says.
Arcs, the way that you're developing your characters may not be working. And the reason? Your arcs might be the wrong shape.
The reason?
Wait, aren't the arcs arc-shaped? We think a lot about the magnitude of character change, where the character starts out and where they end up. But we don't think as much about the path that they take to get there. How the change in a character happens through the course of the novel is going to affect the story and the character in profound ways.
Yeah.
Visualizing how this change progresses might help you understand and fix any issues with it. Speaking of issues, never miss an issue of this channel by subscribing. Wait, is this a magazine or a video channel? I mean, it can't be a video, there's all this paper around. Alright, so in his lectures, Brandon Sanderson talks about these character sliders. So basically, the character will be at a point on one of these sliders, or at different points on these different sliders, and you'll move them either up or down depending on the arc that they go through. And the arc of a character is going to involve them moving across one or more of these different sliders. So the three he talks about are competency, which is basically the skill of the character. So this, moving from this end to this end, is basically like your master apprentice plot. The character starts out really unskilled, And then through the course of the story, they become more and more skilled, more and more competent in order to deal with the main conflict of the story. Proactivity is basically the agency of the character. You see this a lot in character versus self conflicts, where the character has some kind of internal self-doubt or depression or something that's causing them to not take action that they need to take. And over the course of the story, they become more proactive and start dealing with the problems in the rest of the plot. Likeability, the last one, is sort of the hero-villain axis. It's how much the reader likes the character, so that usually maps onto who's a hero and who's a villain, although you can have likable villains and unlikable heroes, so that's not necessarily always true. But likability is basically the reader's opinion of the character. Now, these sliders work really well for understanding the basic dynamics of a character arc, where you're starting the character out and where they're ending up over the course of the story, sort of understanding the magnitude of the change. But the path that the character takes to go from one end of a slider to the other is really important, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. You can have two characters who have the same magnitude of change, but because they take different paths to that change, they're going to create two very different stories. So to look at this through time, we're going to take one of these sliders and basically plot it out for the length of the story. So up here I have the slider that I'm looking at. So let's say this is the skill one, the competency. So this is low skill, this is high skill, and then this is kind of the progress of the plot. So the start of the story to the end of the story. So let's look at two different characters that take kind of a different path to arrive at the same point. Say character A starts out here at the beginning of the story with no skill, and they have a very straight kind of linear progress all the way up to where they need to be to deal with the conflict at the end of the story. So let's look at another character. They start out at the same point and need to end at the same point because they need to deal with the same conflict, but they take a different path. So maybe they start out and don't make very much progress, and then they have a little bit of progress, and then they kind of stall out for a little while, and then they have a big jump in progress, and then they kind of stall out a little bit more, and then they kind of slowly get better, and then towards the
Yeah, okay, that's invigorating.
Wait, no. Heroes are supposed to be right. Right? In every adventure cartoon and shonen anime, the protagonists take on
It's my villain that I really need to work on.
uplift their friends and save the world. All goals shaped in contrast to those of a villain. Yet when I look back at the stories that I love, I can't help but be drawn to that villain. In college, I'm reading Beowulf, an Old Norse myth that is a foundation of Western storytelling, in which a hero, Beowulf, kills a villain, Grendel. Yet despite Beowulf being the hero, I can't help but feel pity for Grendel. He's a monstrous, ogre-like, murdering giant compared to a demon. But he has a mother who mourns him. Villains are supposed to be evil, terrifying, and wrong. But what happens when villains are more human than that? What happens when the heroes falter, stumble, or sin? What happens when the societies that heroes defend are the ones that create villains?
I think I need Zeko on this. Here we go. I'm going to add Zeko to this mission.
Tai Lung, Silco, and even Dr. Doofenshmirtz are all answers to this question. So sit back and join me as we explore the world of villains. You are being hunted. This villain is chasing you right now. In fact, it's hunting all of us. a slow, terrifying hunt. This
All right. Why are most
The
writers
simple
boring?
fact is that most writers are boring, and in fact, most writing is boring. And you might be thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me. The truth is that you might be surprised, because we review and read hundreds of manuscripts every single month that get sent to us from people who are looking to publish. And a lot of them have been told by friends and family that their books are fantastic. But when we read them from a professional lens, we can actually see that most writers make the same mistakes that are making their books boring. First, I will describe what I mean by boring writing. So what are these mistakes that I'm talking about that we see day in and day out? The first up is an overuse of very predictable storylines. So people using cliches, things that we've seen over and over before. The other mistake is characters, where people don't build enough depth into their characters. They
I'm
often have
trying.
too many characters. Or the other issue is they haven't created a strong enough bond with the character. So we don't have a genuine connection to their main character. Another big mistake that we see almost daily, and this is pretty much in 100% of the manuscripts that get sent to us, is pacing. So people don't pace manuscripts correctly. And truth be told, with that one, that is hard to do. You need a professional editor, because even professional writers who've written 10 books or more still make this mistake. The other thing that we find makes manuscripts boring is a lack of emotional engagement. So if when someone is reading your book, it doesn't give them an emotional reaction, a deeply rooted emotional reaction, then it becomes boring quite quickly. The other mistake is not having stakes. So not having something that really makes the reader say, oh my God, you know, what is about to happen? I need to find out. The stakes and the tension are rising all the time. And then the other thing we see is people are too descriptive, right? Their writing is just too verbose, is the technical term. But what that really means, too much is going on to describe simple scenes that don't need that much description. And when you describe too much, it slows everything down, and then things get very boring. I think I've harped on this point for long enough about boring writing. The reason this is so important is because if your writing becomes boring, people won't read your whole book, and of course you'll get bad reviews. So I wanted to really labor the point and explain all the various ways that your writing can become boring. So now you're probably sat there thinking, well, Patrick, I hope you're about to tell me how I can actually fix these problems rather than continuing to bang on about boring writing. So yes, here are the ways to fix those problems. And these aren't going to be the usual advice that you see all the time. One of the key things I'm going to say is don't be afraid of taking risks. As a writer, you need to try new things, even if it doesn't technically fit into the stereotypes of this is good writing or here is really good writing advice. You know, follow Ernest Hemingway's tips. You need to occasionally do something different, because so much has been written that for readers, they want to find something different, catches them by surprise. And so take those risks when you're writing. The other mistake I see a lot is that people often have a really unique voice. And then they come to us and they say, you know, I got some feedback on my writing and people said I should change this, change that, etc. And actually what was happening, we see this a lot with traditional publishers, is they're editing out what makes that writer unique. They're taking away the unique voice. And what you need to do, again, to stand out in, of course, what is crowded, everything these days is crowded, you need to double down on your unique voice. And having the right editor is going to help you do that. Professional editors will pull out your unique voice. They won't tell you to change it because it doesn't fit into a stereotypical writing style. Now, another point about editing, and this is why it's so important to have a professional editor who knows what they're doing, is we see a lot of manuscripts get over-edited. So don't over-edit your work. You want to keep that natural voice like we were speaking about. And again, a professional editor is going to help you strike the right balance between editing and then going too far. At this point, again, it feels like I'm laboring it, but when you over-edit work, you can really edit out the soul of your book. And that's really the key point here, is that to get your writing to come across, it's very emotional, it needs to connect with the reader. And so I really want you to think about keeping your soul. And ultimately, one of the phrases I always like to use is that when it's a creative process, the best thing is you pushed out. So how you naturally would talk, how you would naturally do things, and then put that out to the world. And then, of course, naturally, not everybody is going to like that, but it will connect with the right people. Now, we've spoken about the mistakes that make writing boring, how you can correct those mistakes, but how do you actually know if your writing is boring? So here are a few ways to tell. Of course, rejection from agents, traditional publishers is definitely one of them. So really be very mindful of the feedback that you get, because they will often not give you their real, true feelings on your book. They'll naturally soften it. And sometimes they won't even really give you much feedback at all. But you have to try and read between the lines and then figure out, what do they really mean here? What are they really saying here? And then if you see, of course, the same feedback popping up multiple times, that's a really clear signal that that's probably the root cause of what's making your reading boring and what you need to address. This is the other reason that beta readers are so important. And I would say beta readers that are not your friends and family. Join an actual group or connect with readers somehow who don't mind hurting your feelings. Of course, a professional editor is great for this because they are focused on making the book the very best it can be. They don't worry about your feelings, they just want to improve your writing. And one of the key signals here will be people not being very connected to your characters, not having a big emotional reaction to what you've written about. But the biggest one of all, I often say to people, is if you're worried about your writing being boring, is reread your own work. And if you find yourself losing interest or just, getting bored, fidgeting, etc., that's a really good indicator that you've gone down that route and you need to address some of these issues and items to make your writing more engaging. What this is all leading towards is moving away from boring and moving towards writing that is really exciting. So to excite your readers, what you need to do is you need to be more yourself, so keep your voice a lot more unique. You also need to make those characters really interesting, really relatable, make people excited to find out what's going on, and then break the rules a little bit here and there, like we said. So do take risks, do slightly different things, anything that just shakes stuff up so that when people are reading it, they're excited about the work. Where you can, surprise the reader and then inject conflict. Conflict is one of the best ways to keep people engaged and keep people reading, because they keep wondering what's going to happen next. We have to keep reading to figure out, where is the story going? What is going to happen to this character? The good news is that boring writing, or being a boring writer, is not something that you're stuck with. There are very simple ways to change this, as I have explained. Take those risks, give it a try. Let me know in the comments down below why you think your writing might be boring and which of these tips you're going.
Right on. Well, that's the hour for me. So I'm at 36,178 words, about 81 pages. I'm really actually glad I stopped to outline just so that I can really visualize what I'm missing from my story. It's making it easier for me to fill in the gaps with some of my characters. It's easy to write one plot, but I'm trying to write like simultaneous subplots, and it's not easy to do that in a linear format, like Act 3. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, because there's simultaneous things happening with different characters. And God, I feel like I need a whiteboard where it's like I can, in different colored markers, I can, on the right side is the main plot, and on the left are like my subplots. I'm a visual guy. All right, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. I appreciate you hanging out, and I'll be on tomorrow night. Bye-bye.